Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deke's Techniques. I know your time is important, which is why we're going to get on with it. We're going to take this still photograph of a falcon and we're going to make its wings flap like crazy. Flap, 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 I tell you, using Puppet Warp inside Photoshop. Here, let me show you exactly how it works. So this is the effect we're going for with a bunch of Puppet Warped falcons sitting on top of each other. We're going to start off inside this image, which comes to us from the Fotolia image library, about which you can learn more at fotolia.com/Deke. Now, the first step is to extract the falcon from the background and fill in the background so that we can expose pieces of the background as the wings flap around. I didn't find a really great method for masking this bird, so instead I drew this ridiculously complex path outline. But before we come to that, we need to create a copy of the image. So make sure the background is selected here in the Layers panel and press Ctrl-Alt-J or Command-Option-J on the Mac in order to make a duplicate layer, call it Original, and click OK. Now we need to assign the path outline to the layer. So go to the Paths panel and click on Falcon Outline, and I'll press the A key to switch to the arrow tool and click on the path outline, and you can see how enormously complicated it is. I just drew it by hand. It took about 15-20 minutes. So let's assign it as a vector mask to the active layer by switching back to the Layers panel, dropping down to the Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the panel, and you want to press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and click on it. And that goes ahead and turns that path outline into a vector mask. Now turn off that layer for a moment and then click on the background again. And now we need to get rid of the falcon. And the easiest way to do that is to press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and click on the vector mask for the layer above in order to convert it to a selection outline. Then go up to the Select menu, choose Modify, and choose the Expand command. I went with the value of 50 pixels, and now I'll click OK in order to expand that selection. Now the next thing is to apply Content-Aware Fill. So go up to the Edit menu and choose the Fill command. And then make sure Use is set to Content Aware and click OK. And that'll go ahead and fill in that selection. And because it's fairly tight around the falcon, it does a halfway decent job, but I wouldn't say it does a perfect job. I'll press Control-D or Command-D on the Mac, and you can still see seams all over the place. Now, you can whip out the healing brush and spend 5 to 10 minutes on this project. Or, because it's a blurry background, you could go up to the Filter menu, choose Blur, and choose Gaussian Blur, and then dial in a whopping radius value of 50 pixels, and that'll go ahead and smooth things over. Then click OK. Now we can bring the falcon back into the scene, and we can move him anywhere we want. I'll just go ahead and click on that layer to select it. Make sure the vector mask is deselected, and then I'll go up to the Edit menu and choose Free Transform. And the reason I'm doing this is because I have some specific pixel coordinates in mind, but I just want to demonstrate that you can move this guy any place you like. I'll click on X up here in the options bar and change that value to 1283. And then I'll tab over to Y and change it to 996.5. And obviously these are arbitrary values that I just found by dragging the falcon around. Now I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac a couple of times in order to apply that change. Now it's time to apply Puppet Warp, and there is no doubt that you and I are going to get slightly different results. That's just the way it works. And I'm going to get different results than I just showed you a moment ago. However, I do want to give you a sense of how this works. We want to create a copy of this layer by pressing Ctrl-Alt-J or Command-Option-J again. And I'll go ahead and call this layer Wings and click OK. And now we need to place it in a Smart Object by pressing the M key to switch back to the rectangular marquee tool. And then I'll right-click inside the image window and choose Convert to Smart Object. And that goes ahead and places both the layer and the vector mask inside a Smart Object. Now go to the Edit menu and choose Puppet Warp. I'm going to start by laying down a couple of pins here inside the wings. So I'll click right about there to set a pin, and I'll click here as well. And pins, by the way, when you're working with Puppet Warp, indicate areas that you want to change, that you want to bend to new locations, as well as areas that you want to fix in place. I'll go ahead and click here and here inside the wing as well. And then I'll click in these two locations to fix these points along his shoulder, or whatever part of his anatomy that is, if it's a he. And then I'll click here and here as well. I want to lock down his knees, so I'll click at these locations. That'll help to prevent his tail feathers from moving around too much. And finally, I decided to go ahead and click inside of his eyes here in order to create his head from getting too warped. And I clicked on the top of his head too. Now I'll go ahead and zoom back out here. Now we want to move some of these pins to new locations. So go ahead and click on this one and shift click on this guy here to select them both, and then drag him down like so. And then I'll shift click on this guy to turn him off and drag this pin down to about this location here. And now I'll do the same with the other wing. Click and shift click to select these 2 points. Drag this guy down to about this location, shift click, and then drag this one down to about here. I want his elbows, this location right here, to have a little bit of flex in them. So I'm going to change this mode option to rigid. But notice what that does. It doesn't actually make the hugest difference so far in the bird wings, except for a negative difference. You can see that we've got these weird spines over here on the right-hand side. And that's a function of this expansion value. Now, expansion is set pretty low by default. And incidentally, you may be seeing the mesh that's surrounding this object right here, which I find to be a little bit intrusive. But it is helpful for demonstrating the expansion. Notice that it goes slightly outside of the feathers, and that's because the expansion is cranked up to 2 pixels. You can take that value down in order to clip the object, and that, I suppose, is useful if you didn't draw a very good mask in the first place. This one is quite the mask. It's very accurate. So what we need to do instead is raise the expansion value. So I'll click inside of it. And just to make sure I don't lose any pins, because if you start dragging that slider there that you can get by clicking on a down arrow, your pins might start disappearing. So instead, just click inside the value and press Shift up arrow. And notice that that brings back those feathers quite nicely when we have the expansion value set to 12 pixels. Now I'll press the Enter key in order to accept that value, and I'll turn off the darn mesh there, and I'll press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac in order to center my zoom, and then I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac once again in order to apply that change. Now from here out, it's just a matter of doing this a few more times. So the next thing that we need to do is figure out the final placement of the wings. So I'll go over to my Layers panel and get rid of this filter mask because it's just going to clutter things up by right-clicking inside that white rectangle and choosing Delete Filter Mask. And then with the Wings layer active, press Control-J or Command-J on the Mac in order to jump it to a new layer. And notice that the Puppet Warp Smart Filter comes along with it. Double-click on Puppet Warp in order to revisit the pins here. And then click on this one, shift-click on this guy, and drag him down like so. And I'll shift-click on this pin to turn it off, and then I'll drag this guy farther down to about this location here. And now I'm going to get these 2 pins, click and shift-click, and drag them down to about here. And then shift-click at this location and drag this pin down to about there. Now then, we have the matter of adding a little bit of flex to the wings. So I'll click on this pin, and notice if you press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and move your cursor away from the pin, you can add some rotation to the pin, like so. And I have a specific value in mind, so I'm just going to dial it in. I'm going to change that value to 17 degrees, and then I'm going to click on this guy, and I'm going to change his value to 76 degrees. And then I'll click on this pin, and I'll dial it in. Notice right now, rotate is set to auto. As soon as I dial in a value, like -20, in this case, it'll change to fixed. And then I'll click at this location and change its angle value to -69 in order to produce the effect you see on screen. And then I'll press the Enter key a couple of times in order to apply that change. Now, if you want to get more of a sense of what's going on and you really want to flex your stuff where this animation is concerned, then you click on the bottom wings layer, press Control-J or Command-J on the Mac in order to create another copy. Click on the one in the background there, double-click on its Puppet Warp, go ahead and grab its wing pins right here, drag them up to, let's say, right about there. Then shift-click on this pin to turn it off and drag this guy up like so. And then go over to these 2 pins on the left-hand wing and bring them up a little bit like so. And then shift-click on this guy and lift the end of the wing up to about this location. And you just keep doing that over and over again. All told, I created 19 of these layers. That is 18 of the wings variations along with the original. And notice how I did things here. I'll go ahead and zoom in on these wings. I started slowly and then went more quickly as the wing comes down toward the central area, and then I slowed things down again. And I did that on both sides, and I started flexing and adding angle values right about in this region right here. Fair amount of work, as you might imagine, and I might have gotten something wrong, actually. I'm going to press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to zoom out from this image. And I'll go ahead and switch back over to my image in progress. And sure enough, I got a problem. Notice here that the wings are going in back of the tail feathers. We can't have any of that. And that's just happening on this top wings layer. So I'll double click on its puppet warp, and I'll click on this pin right there, and I'll go up to the options bar and click on this icon, Send Pin Forward, which should move the wings in front of the tail. And notice at this point, when we're seeing this preview, that there's this gook around the tail, and that's part of the expansion, but it ends up going away. I'll click on this pin as well in the elbow portion of the wing, and I will once again click on the Send Pin Forward icon in order to move that area in front of the tail. And I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on a Mac in order to apply that change. You can see that we have a little misregistration where the tail feathers are concerned, but that's actually just fine. It means that his tail feathers will wave a little bit as he flies, which is probably the way things would really work. And that, friends, is at least one way to draw animated bird wings using the puppet warp effect here inside Photoshop. If you're a member of lynda.com, and say, if you're not, kids, go to lynda.com/Deke for a free week and be part of the Chic Geek clique. I know, a lot of words rhyme with my name. But if you are a member, then you can check out the follow-up movie in which I show you how to animate this text right here using onion skinning so that you can see everything that you're doing. If you're waiting for next week's free movie, I'll show you how to assemble everything we've done so far into an actual animation so you can watch it play inside Photoshop. Deke's techniques each and every week. Keep watching.